Thank you. My name is Josh Lamar. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Amplinate, and I'm here to talk about a structure of web revolutions. My background is actually not in Web3 or crypto or NFTs. I've been doing research and design on the web for the past 20 years, and my perspective has been more looking at the history of how we have looked at our relationship with technology and how we create and innovate products for people, for normal people, humans. I want to start with a question for each of you to ponder. And this is a question that if you want to share with me later, I would love to hear. But is there any time that you can think of either a novel, a painting, a piece of music, a film that has impacted your life so dramatically that you can't remember what life was like before that? Just ponder. Just ponder. For me, that actually was The Matrix. And The Matrix came out in 1999, and I was at the point in undergrad, and my background in undergrad was actually studying music and poetry. And this was not a thing that I wasn't thinking about working in technology at all at that point. And then this film came out, and it caused me to suddenly, it blew my mind, we'll just put it that way. And it caused me to really think about asking the hard questions about the world, about reality. What is real? What is true? How do we know what is real? And it started taking me down a path of epistemology and the study of how do we know what is true, and metaphysics, and how do we know what is real? And that is a rabbit hole, to put it one way. And the more that I thought about this, the more I started becoming curious about the world and about people. And it led me to become a researcher. So I've been doing research online for the past 20 years because of this movie. Now, in the film, I'll actually explain that. I'm going to bring it up again later. So maybe I'll save the film plot for a little bit later. But the idea of having a philosophical perspective on the world and asking these hard questions is something that I found that works really well in research. Because as a researcher, we want to ask questions. We want to be curious. We want to understand who these people are that we're trying to build and design our products for. And it's with that I'm going to transition into looking at another scientist, actually, Thomas Kuhn. And the structure of scientific revolutions is a work that he published in 1962. And in it, he was looking at how a scientific revolution happened. Now, the title of this talk was The Structure of Web Revolution. So here's where I'm going with this. We're going to talk a little bit about what Thomas Kuhn said, and then we're going to apply it to paradigms of the past from philosophy, paradigms of the future from science fiction, and I'm going to tie it all back into where we're going in the future with Web3. I'm going to briefly go to this slide. I know it's not meant to be read. These are just examples of scientific revolutions of the past, and I think that it's better to start with an idea of what an example would be. So we're going to use the geocentric to the heliocentric theory as the example that I'll talk through here. Now, there was a time in the past where we were told or we believed that the world, the Earth, was the center of the solar system. And Galileo actually designed and developed the scientific method and the telescope and looked up into the heavens and he said, nope, that is not true. This Copernican theory, the heliocentric theory that the sun is at the center is actually more true. And it was proven, and then he said, this is now true, and that was actually the revolution. So in Thomas Kuhn's structure, he starts with normal science. The idea is that normal science exists in the paradigm that we are living in now. It is the way that we see the world and how we interpret the world around us. Now, as we're doing the process of normal science, we understand the world through a specific lens or paradigm. And the paradigm is actually that. It's a lens, it is a measuring stick, it is a mental model of how we perceive the world. Now, as we're doing research, scientific research, or it could even be human behavioral research as well, we're going to come across anomalies. And as we are talking to people, we're going to see things like outliers. So outliers or anomalies are going to come up. And over time, there are going to be more and more of them. Now, in the case of the heliocentric theory, it would be the little epicycles, where if you're looking at the heavens and you see what's going on up here, and the planets are revolving these weird ways that go like this, and then they kind of go back, and then they go over here again. And it's like, well, how do you make sense of that? And then you gather more data, and suddenly the anomalies become so frequent that you can't understand the world without seeing and embracing and understanding that the anomaly maybe is just not an anomaly, it's actually causing you to think about the world in a new way. So that's where the crisis comes from, where there are too many anomalies to be able to understand the world through the existing paradigm. That's where the revolution happens. When the revolution happens, we reject the existing paradigm and we create a new one. And that's what Thomas Kuhn calls a paradigm shift. So the paradigm shift that happened in the heliocentric theory was we all suddenly knew that the sun was the center of the solar system and not the Earth. And it's that transition. It's these inflection points in between one idea of the world and another idea of the world. So next, we're going to take a look at paradigms in terms of our relationship to technology. And what's interesting about this is that you can always understand your current paradigm by asking the question, what is expected? Or what is the goal? Or to use the Aristotelian term, what is the final cause? When you understand what's expected, you can help to pinpoint which paradigm you're actually in. So I've developed this framework for this talk, actually, to look at it in terms of paradigms that exist in the physical world and the virtual worlds. The physical is at the bottom, virtual world is at the top. And we have optimistic and pessimistic views of our relationship to technology. So we're going to start at the very beginning with Aristotle. And if there is a person that might be the patron saint for the future of technology, I think it might be Aristotle. He talks about techne, which is roughly translated as art or craftsmanship, but it's this idea to be a reasoned and true state of capacity to produce. And it is the exercise of the craft. That's where craftsmanship kind of comes in. And he also, in the Nicomachean Ethics, relates this and all endeavors in our art and craftsmanship to producing the good, ingenuity, human ingenuity, the best that humans can produce, the art that we can produce. So this is in the physical world and a more optimistic view of our relationship to technology, that technology is a means to create that which is the best that humans can offer and to make life better for ourselves. Great place to start. Another author that I wanted to bring out here is Robert Pirsig, who wrote Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance in the 70s. And in the novel, he discusses a relationship to technology that's maybe a little different. And what really stuck out to me at this point was this idea that we have a choice to how much we let technology rule us. Now, in the novel, that's actually him with his son on the slide. And in the novel, he is on a motorcycle trip with his son and his friends, John and Sylvia. And his friend, John, doesn't learn how to fix his motorcycle. So of course, there's a moment where the motorcycle breaks and he doesn't know what to do. And he gets angry. And the author writes, it's not the motorcycle maintenance, it's all of technology that they can't take. Of course, John signs off every time the subject of cycle repair comes up, even when it's obvious he is suffering for it. To get away from technology out into the country in the fresh air and sunshine was why they're on the motorcycle in the first place. And this idea that the motorcycle becomes not only this place where they are trying to get out into the world to appreciate the world and not technology, but technology gets in the way because it breaks and it causes them to not be able to do the thing that they want to do, which is not be in technology. So this is a more pessimistic view of the role of technology in society, that it can actually hurt us if we don't pay attention to it. It can actually cause us to not be able to engage with the world in the way that the world is moving because we're not up to speed with it. And this is also a fair point because, especially in the context of looking at the future and future innovations, if we're starting from a place here and we move a little bit, you're going to take people with you. But if you have people over here and we're moving over here, suddenly it's very difficult for people to make that leap because technology becomes something that they have to be on top of and learn. But the role of research and design is actually to make the technology piece invisible. And so there's an agency that comes from this idea that we can choose our relationship with the technology that we include in our life. We can choose to let it dominate us and rule our lives, or we can choose to get away from it entirely and just go off into the woods and like Walden. And there's somewhere in the middle that most of us are probably going to be at. So the next philosopher I wanted to mention, this is going to be on the pessimistic side in the virtual world, is Jean Baudrillard. And he's a French philosopher, and he's actually also wrote the work that inspired the Wachowskis to write and direct The Matrix. And he talks about the hyper-real. Now, this is going to go off the deep end. I'm just going to warn you right now. And if any of you have studied Baudrillard at all, you'll know. So the hyper-real is that this idea is a sign without a referent, a simulation without an original, a copy without a real. It is the generation by models of a real without origin or reality, a hyper-real. Now, basically what this is meaning, he was writing this in the context of media study theory. So from a media perspective, when you see things that are reproduced, like an advertisement, or you see them online, you're seeing a virtual copy of the thing, not the thing itself. And then he later wrote and likened the internet to the hyperreal as well, because these are copies of things. And the idea is that over time, we see the copy, or we see the hyperreal more real than the actual real. And then he takes it to the further conclusion that things like the Gulf War did not even take place because it existed only in our minds, because we only experienced it through media. Now, obviously, this is going way off the deep end here. And he does this on purpose because he's trying to make the point that the copy of the thing, the hyper-real, is actually more real. This relates to the Matrix in this way that it's more about deception, that it's actually something that is hard to comprehend when we don't see it. And it questions our ability to engage with the physical reality. And I'm going to finish this section by looking at Heidegger. So Martin Heidegger talks about technology as shaping our understanding of the world, influencing us, challenging us to examine our relationship with it. He says, everywhere we remain unfree and chained to technology, whether we passionately affirm or deny it. Now, I actually put this in a positive or optimistic perception of technology because Heidegger is really talking about actively engaging with the way that technology exists in our lives. And understanding that and allowing it and taking agency over how we shape that allows us to be intentional about our use of technology. So this is what it looks like into the 2x2, and I'm now going to move to looking at the future because interestingly, and maybe this is similar for you because what I asked earlier, is there a movie or book or a thing that inspired you and helped change your life? Maybe some of those were science fiction. And a lot of times people are inspired by science fiction, especially people that work in technology or work in innovation, because we're looking at the future. Maybe you're of the Star Trek generation. I grew up watching Star Trek and absolutely loved it. And Star Trek has inspired new ways of thinking about the world because we imagined or we dreamed about something in a new way. Ray Bradbury, another science fiction author, writes that science fiction is any idea that occurs in the head and doesn't exist yet, but soon will, and will change everything for everybody, and nothing will ever be the same again. Sounds like a paradigm, doesn't it? And that's where we're going with this. Because this room, the people in this room, you are the ones that are creating that future. That idea that exists in science fiction will soon exist because we are creating it. So let's move to the 2x2 and a few movies. And really, yes, this is a reason that I just wanted to talk about all my favorite movies. So this is Terminator 2, and I intentionally picked Terminator 2, not Terminator 1. Here's the reason why. Again, we're in the physical world, at the bottom of the 2x2, and we're in a pessimistic view of our relationship to technology. Now, Terminator 2, in the context of the movie, the first Terminator that came back to try to kill someone didn't work out, and he later comes back to try to kill Sarah Connor's son, John Connor. And the context of the movie is that the sentient AI happened, they took over, and they are combating against humanity to take over. And in the future, John Connor sends the Terminator back to save himself as the other Terminator is coming back to kill him. And so there's this war that happens. Now, the paradigm that we're talking about here is about confrontation. Technology is something that confronts us, that we are actively in battle with. And the fear of sentient AI is that it's going to actually take over. Now we can come back to the Matrix. In a pessimistic view of the role of technology in the relationship to humanity, we can look at technology as a way to deceive us, to deceive humans. So again, we're in the virtual world because in the logic of the Matrix, the machines have taken over. Similarly, there has been a war with the machines. Sentient AI happened, and the machines won, and they enslaved humanity and put us in pods and jack into the Matrix a view of the world. Now, this is the Plato's cave, Plato's allegory of the cave, essentially here, that we are plugged into the Matrix, we see these things, none of them are real. It's kind of like the hyper-real. Back to Baudrillard, because Baudrillard, or actually the Wachowskis, had all of the actors in the film read Simulacra and Simulation by Jean Baudrillard to make this film, because this is in the context that they're really trying to make the point. And then we're asking all these questions about what is real, if, and actually this harkens back to Descartes as well. I think, therefore I am. And this idea that we can deny the world around us, but I am the one that is thinking, therefore I know that I exist. And I wonder, and this is the in the place of the questions, how could I be deceived? And that's also kind of where Descartes starts his meditations, that we could be deceived, but I can't be deceived to know that I exist. And so even in the Cartesian way, you might think that you still exist even if you're in the Matrix, but there might be a deeper level deception that's happening. More on the positive, optimistic side of things, we could look at Ready Player One. I have a photo from the film here. I actually read the book first, and the book is 10 times better. So please read the book if you haven't read it, especially if you like the 80s, because it's really fantastic. But in the role of our relationship to technology, the oasis in the context of Ready Player One is a virtual world that connects the characters together. They find their friends, they hang out, they have adventures, and it's not to say that everything that happens in the movie is positive. I'm really just looking at the relationship of humans and technology. And in the context of the film, we actually have a very positive relationship with technology because the Oasis is a place that can connect humans. It's a place where humans have better life in the virtual world, maybe we might call that the metaverse, than they have in the real world, which has become a very difficult place to live. And finally, Elysium. And this is the cyborg category. This is in the physical world with a more optimistic view of our relationship to technology. In Elysium, Matt Damon's character suffers some radiation poisoning. He is trying to get fixed. He wants to get up into the city of Elysium that is in the orbit of the Earth to get fixed, because we have the ability, the magic ability from medicine to just fix these things now. But what ends up happening is he becomes this cyborg. He gets this exoskeleton strapped onto him so that he can be superhuman. And this idea of the cyborg is a really interesting philosophical question to ask about our relationship to technology. Things like sentience, Things like humanness. Are we still human? Are we more than human? Are we a new kind of human? And of course, that also brings up questions of ethics. And is there a difference? If we are subservient to technology, like if we have a pacemaker that's keeping us alive because it keeps our heart moving, are we therefore subservient to that technology? Or is that just a technology that we include in our lives? And so it asks us to ask these questions about the role of how we are going to integrate as technology as part of our biology. So here is what this looks like in the 2x2. You can kind of overlay it with the philosophers as well. So wrapping this up, I'm going to look at taking us back to the Web3 discussion, because we can have a lot of different ways to talk about Web3. I'm not going to try to define it right here. But we can talk about it in terms of AI, of NFTs, of blockchain, virtual reality, the spatial web, and Internet of Things. And these are just some of the ideas of the paradigms that we have going into them. Now, each of you here are going to be working in different ways in these spaces. And so it's important to understand, what is your paradigm that you have, and what are you going to do with it? As John Connor says somewhere in the middle of Terminator 2, the future is not set. There's no fate but what we make for ourselves. And we get to choose that fate, because we're the ones that are designing and creating this technology and innovating as we go. So there's two questions that I want to leave you with. One, which technological paradigms are you ready to reject, embrace, or create? Again, we're going to come from some paradigm of our relationship to technology. And just because we have an optimistic or pessimistic view of technology doesn't mean that we have to create technology that is going to hurt us, deceive us, or confront us. We can always use a pessimistic view of technology to create it in such a way for the betterment of humanity. And then the second question is to look at, how does your product change our relationship with technology? Is there a paradigm shift that we are creating for our target audience with the products that we're creating right now? And it is with these questions that I leave you to discover, and I ask to contemplate, and please talk to me about them, because I love talking about this as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. And,
Thank you.
I haven't got a microphone, but my voice is loud enough. So I want to see if anyone in the audience has got any questions for Josh. Please put your hands up. One over here. Any more at all? Okay. So I'll grab a second microphone.
Excellent. I'm glad we have time for Q&A. I know this is a lot. Also, I have a bonus slide of all of the other films that I considered for this. And if you ever want to do a double movie night or something like that, these are all really fantastic ones.
Josh, thanks very much for that fascinating talk. When I'm a philosopher of science once upon my time myself, and so I really appreciate the revolutionary insights, and I'll be talking in stage 2 after the break about not the philosophical revolutions, but the industrial revolutions. My question to you is, what is actually going to be the tipping point that makes these Web3 ideas move from an idea to some reality? Because if we look at the scientific revolutions, it wasn't just the new ideas that swung. Copernicus had this idea, but it wasn't adopted. It needed more than just the idea. It needed Kepler to come along and say, you know what, it's not circles, it's ellipses. When we have ellipses, we can predict things better. It needed Galileo to produce a telescope, and people looked in the celestial sphere, which they had thought in their old paradigm was perfect, and they saw the moons of Jupiter. And most of all, it needed Newton with his whole theory of calculus and the laws of motion to pin it all together. So that's what tipped that over. Einstein's theory of relativity was tipped over by the movement of the distant stars, which could be seen by the eclipse of the sun in 1919, published on the front page of the Times. So what are the corresponding thing that's going to change Web3 from being a nice idea that attracts a small number of people to this conference center in London in the morning to something that really is going to change the world?
Because as we gather more data, the more and more we can't ignore it. And that was what the tipping point for Thomas Kuhn was, as the anomalies occur so frequently that we cannot ignore them anymore, suddenly we have to confront them. And from a paradigm perspective, it's the amount of those anomalies that cause us to create or embrace a new paradigm. From the product side, I'm going to reference Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, which talks about how in early adopters, the difference between early adopters and mass adoption is that early adopters are okay with piecing together the experience, whereas mass adoption, normal people top of the bell curve, are not able to do that. And it's because technology is actually something, right? Technology is something that we shouldn't have to, there we go, thanks. We shouldn't have to piece together the experience for ourselves. The technology should seamlessly piece it together so that we don't have to think about it, because normal people don't really need to learn how to use technology. Like, if you had to know HTML just to go to the internet, like, no one would use it. And in order to get to this mass adoption place, the tipping point is really going to be connecting the fabric of all of these things together in such a way that normal people can use it without understanding the underlying technology that supports it.
Thank you so much, Josh. Any more questions from the audience at all?
I just thought I'd add, like, you were talking about kind of like what point is...
I'll give you the microphone because it's just the way the voice propels down.
Sure. I mean, yeah, you were talking about like what specific point or product could be the tipping point, and I definitely feel in the context of like, where we are and here at this conference and stuff, that like smart contracts could almost be like one of these things that are kind of the tipping point for, accumulating data, seamlessly integrating kind of like, different products and different services and stuff. So I was thinking a lot about that recently, and just like how it feels like we're almost past the tipping point in terms of things. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, definitely.
Another question here.
Are smart contracts the new Terminators? Because, once they start going, they're very hard to stop. If we have a bug in the smart contract, oh my goodness, it's terrible, isn't it? So, yeah, are these things really what we should be embracing?
That's the really difficult question, right? And it's because we can choose to create it in whatever way that we want. And it's the idea that if we can choose to create it in such a way that's going to paint us into a corner or develop us into a corner that we can't come back from. I mean, I've seen that a lot in my past as well, where we kind of start down a path, but then because we already started down that path, there's a sunk cost fallacy that says that we have to continue with that path, and then suddenly you have ancient code 30 years later that you're still supporting. And at the same time, we want to do it in such a way that's going to be flexible, that's going to support humanity, and hopefully correct some of the things that we've learned from the past.